You probably, just like me, wish for a high salary and to be in demand right upon graduation from university. That's why I switched from physics to computer engineering and finally to computer science. Ever since then, I've been working for nearly 2 years as a full-time software engineer, starting from big tech companies like Amazon to small fintech startups in New York City. In this video, I'll dive deep into the pros and cons of making the switch regardless of what degree you're switching from, and also considering doing a master's in computer science for a whole career transition if your bachelor's degree was in something else. So let's dive in. Being a software engineer means that you will be reading documentation, writing code, and tinkering with it. While software engineers wear many hats, and that's especially true in the beginning of your career, eventually you'll have to specialize. Most of the time, specialization means front-end or back-end, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about. While these two roles will differ from a company to a company and even from a team to a team, there are other things that you should be aware of to know whether you like or not. And first, it is infra. Most tech companies have big infrastructure teams. And what they usually do is to build tools for other software engineers to handle telemetry and to develop the company's CI/CD, which you can think of as basically the process a software engineer needs to go through from making their code changes through testing them locally, through pushing them all the way to production, which is what the customers use. And then you also have data engineers, which are responsible for building data-intensive applications using standard technologies and building data pipelines that are responsible for moving data from one place to another. To make sure that you really have at least one specialization that you are somewhat interested in, that you might enjoy working in, you should do a bunch of sample projects that involve the type of work that you will do in one of those specializations. In terms of what projects to do, for backend, just Google backend projects and just choose one. Don't try to analyze which one would be the best or most comprehensive. You will start getting the intuition once you work on different types of projects, and that will organically help to teach yourself what the different roles will look like. The same would apply for front-end projects. You can simply just Google them and find a guide to do something simple with JavaScript or React. However, to get a better sense, then you should try doing this. First, start with making super simple front-end application. Something with a few buttons and text. Just make it look nice and usable. Next, for setting up your backend, consider using a backend language like Golang or Python, which are widely used in the industry today. Use them with a simple web framework to make just simple APIs that will interact with your front end. When you have that set up, hook it up to a database like MongoDB or PostgreSQL. Next, after you get that down, to get a more holistic view, you will want to containerize your application. So head out to Docker's website, read some documentation, make a super simple bare bones Docker container and run it. After you get your application running and you containerize it, the final step would be hook it up to a Kubernetes cluster. That will be a bit more complicated, but you will see that if you enjoy this type of work, you will definitely enjoy working on the more infrastructure and backend side of things. So at this point, you really want to reflect and see what parts of a project like that you enjoyed more. Now, even if you didn't like dealing with any of this, that doesn't mean that you won't enjoy working as a software engineer. Doing these things in the beginning might be very daunting because you don't understand anything. And when you try to look for something that you don't understand, it explains something, but it relies on other previous knowledge that you also don't have, and then you end up searching for it. So in the beginning, it will feel a lot like chasing your own tail, but with the experience, it gets better and easier. Finally, remember that this is not one weekend's project. Sometimes not even a few weekends project, especially if you don't have any engineering experience. You will have to go through a lot of tutorials to understand what it is that you're doing. Moving to the second reason you might want to avoid making the switch to computer science. Especially in the beginning, you might find it very difficult to get your foot in the door. It would come at no surprise that companies that pay more are more competitive, and therefore landing a job there is going to require more preparation from you, and it's just going to be harder. The good news about this is that your interviews are completely dependent on your ability to perform in them, meaning that your grades or the college that you went to, vast majority of times are not going to matter. With that said, to be able to pass software engineer interviews, you'll have to prepare a lot. Although it is difficult in the beginning, do remember that with practice and experience, you will just get better. And the way it looks like the second time is going to be much better than the way it looked like the first time you were interviewing. So the two main things that you need to remember is that you have to gauge and develop some sense into whether this field is for you, and take into account that, especially in the beginning, you have to put substantial time into preparing for interviews to be able to pass them. So while these might sound discouraging, there are great benefits that come with the switch and then working as a software engineer. The first might seem obvious, it's money, but there is more to it. More often than not, you'll be compensated with equity, and the value of that equity can grow over time. And that might even end up multiplying your compensation, even though it was high in the first place. Think of early employees at Google or Amazon or any company that went big. If you joined Amazon in 2012, the equity that you got back then is multiplied by about 10 times now. And even though you can just take money to invest in stocks from your paycheck, when you get equity from companies, you get a large amount. Up next is that computer science will give you a lot of flexibility in your career. The first and obvious is that you'll be able to work as a software engineer, which means you'll have the chance to specialize in multiple different fields. In addition, you'll be able to advance in your seniority as a software engineer and transition to other roles if you see fit, such as technical program, product, or engineering managers. The development and the lateral move to any of these positions is quite common. And most often than not, even if you join a company as a software engineer, after some tenure of say 1 year, you'll be able to ask your manager and start preparing for the move. The flexibility also comes in form of the industry that you will be working in. Tech companies exist everywhere, from fintech to automotive to medical. So this will give you multiple options for the different industries that you can work in, and therefore the different domain knowledge that you will end up acquiring. Finally, in terms of flexibility, there are different sizes of tech companies. Some are 10,000 people or even more, and some are 100 people or even less. Working for companies at different sizes will feel very different. In a smaller company, you will end up knowing most of the people and it might be very social, while in a more large, mature company, it can be very process-oriented and it can feel very well defined in terms of what your role is and what are your success criteria. So while I was talking about the flexibility as a software engineer, I think the biggest sell point for doing computer science and becoming a software engineer is actually the flexibility that it gives you outside of your job. Working as a software engineer will most likely mean that you're making as much money or even more than investment bankers or other highly paid professionals, while working sometimes substantially less. While usually work-life balance and compensation are a trade-off, you can expect that on average, you will be making more money and have a better work-life balance than in many other jobs in the corporate world. When I made the switch, for me the biggest challenge was handling the job search and the interview preparation while taking classes. And even though there's a lot of competition for internships and entry-level jobs, what made the difference for me was crafting a really effective resume. That was the difference for me to be able to get interviews while I really didn't have any experience, and even though I went to a mid-low tier computer science school. So if you want it, you can click on the link in the description below, put your email in, and it will be emailed to that address. In retrospect, I can say that it is absolutely worth it. Other than the sense of stability that you get working as a software engineer, especially after the 1 or 2 years of experience, you're really able to amass an initial amount of net worth and have the headspace to experiment with ideas and generate even more cash flow to achieve financial independence and the grand goal of freedom, which is exactly what I talk about in the next video, including sharing some numbers if you're interested. I'll see you there.